Skin of the Sinless Part 2, posted by Sucking God's Finger. The holy man followed the path to a spiral staircase that descended into complete darkness. Screams echoed from all around as he made his way down. Footsteps were heard coming from below, but the holy man continued pushing on without a threat. The holy man finally saw the woman making her way up the stairs with a fear-stricken face, and he prepared to end her suffering. She screamed in terror at the sight of him, threw herself off the staircase and back into the pit. The holy man watched her body disappear into the darkness before hearing her body smack against the ground, giving him an idea of how much further he must go. Upon reaching the bottom, the woman was no longer there. The holy man looked around to see where she had gone and noticed a blood trail into a corridor from where she had landed, leaving her brain matter behind. The holy man followed the blood trail to see 3 hounds trying to rip her apart 3 ways. 2 had a hold of her hands, while the third pulled at one of her feet. The beasts had long shaggy hair that flickered in the air and dissipated at the tips into smoke. A growl was heard behind the holy man that grew louder the closer it got. The holy man pushed the blade of the claymore from his shoulder and used the momentum to turn around while swinging upward. His claymore passed clean through the hound that was stalking him and turned it into a puff of black smoke. The holy man looked at his claymore, then turned to face the other 3 that were feasting on the woman from before. The hounds were now baring their grotesque fangs that pierced through their snouts in his direction. A howl came from deep in the labyrinth, and they closed in on their prey. 1 took the front, while the other 2 circled around the holy man in the narrow hallway. The one in front lunged at him first. He plunged his blade into its mouth, making it disappear into smoke. The hound that circled to the left grabbed a hold of his arm mid-thrust with its maw and pulled him off balance. It shook its head violently, ripping the skin and muscle in his forearm with ease, as the hound that circled right went for his throat. The holy man lowered himself, then shoved his iron mask into the hound's mouth on the right to keep it from closing. He slammed its head into the wall with his own. The hound's jaw snapped and its skull cracked from the impact before turning into a puff of smoke. The holy man could hear nails scraping against the ground, getting closer and closer, and realised the hound ripping apart his forearm was just buying time. He yanked his forearm in front of him and brought the pummel of his claymore down on the hound's face, making it no more. The holy man picked up his pace in the direction of the hounds, with his claymore resting on his shoulder. His left arm began to glow, then shortly after reanimated as the path came to a fork, with hounds coming from both directions. The holy man stood fast, with both hands gripping the claymore, holding it in front of him. Hounds came flooding in from both sides, circling the holy man in a sea of black. The holy man swung wide, clearing out the first wave, then was immediately overwhelmed. He fought as best he could, but they ripped him apart, piece by piece. The holy man noticed the hounds were not feasting. The chunks they were taking from him were passing through their stomachs and onto the floor. Those who ripped off a piece of his body would turn and run in the opposite direction. The holy man rested his body, closed his eyes, and let them rip him to pieces. One of the hounds ripped his head from the rest of his body and ran off into the darkness, holding it by the meat of his neck. The holy man opened his eyes to see pieces of himself being carried by shadows through the labyrinth. His right foot, the whole right arm still gripping his claymore, and even his crutch were all travelling next to him, all in the same direction. Reminded him of the first time he had lost his body, the first time he had rested for many, many years, until his body reanimated itself for the first time. The holy war never ends. The hound carrying the holy man's head dissipated into smoke after passing through an archway. His head rolled into a chamber until coming to a stop on its side, while his eyes darted around, looking for their creator. He was in the garden again. Oh, his poor soul was taken by the hounds. The holy man's neck began to glow as a white silhouette took the shape of his body, reanimating itself once again. Starting at the neck, his bones formed first, next his organs, and his muscles grew over them, holding them in place, and lastly his scarred covered skin. The holy man rose to his feet as the rosary pushed his way out of his right forearm, dripping blood onto the grass below. He looked at his right hand to see his claymore forge itself from light before him, forever bound to his soul. The holy man looked back to see piles of human remains scattered round the entrance of the chamber, limbs of many other than his own. A hound was heading in the direction of the chamber in a full sprint, with a limb in its maw. The holy man braced himself for the attack, but the little girl spoke. "I advise you, do not engage. You will be breaking one of our rules." The holy man lowered his claymore and let the hound enter the chamber as it turned into a puff of black smoke. The limb that it carried tumbled on the grass before coming to a halt in front of the holy man. He bent down to pick it up and examine it, to see that it was an arm with a bracelet. The little girl spoke once again. "The man in the next chamber likes to acquire things, but does not like company or leaving his domain. He lets his hounds bring him pieces of those seeking the top of the tower, and takes whatever items they may possess." The holy man turned to look for the door to the next chamber. There was nowhere in sight. The little girl swinging by the pond came into view, as well as new children playing in the garden. The holy man made his way to the wall across the chamber, with his claymore resting against his shoulder, and placed his free hand against it. "I could not tell you how the items make their way into his chamber. Over time, the limbs are absorbed by the garden and the items simply disappear. Reminds me of when my brother had first entered the tower. The holy man continued to make his way around the perimeter of the wall, looking for a hidden entrance. She continued, "He protected me like he promised, as I catered to his every need, and the labyrinth became our home. The chambers are what made us stronger. It helped grow our bond, even though those who had grown from sin itself still didn't understand, except for one. It understood. It felt what we felt, and it listened when no one else did." The little girl stopped mid-sentence after realizing the holy man was no longer there. The holy man walked into the chamber through an illusionary door and stood before an old man sitting on a throne. The man had a red crown that dripped blood into his long white hair, coming down the sides of his head and mixing in with his long white beard. The throne was made of gold and had consumed most of his body. This left his head, hands and feet the only thing visible, and sat on a heap of jewelry and artifacts that no mortal should possess. The perimeter of the chamber was covered with piles of gold coin, stacked taller than one can imagine, and an open ceiling into the night that had stars that shouldn't exist. The old man spoke. "What do you have to offer besides your life?" The holy man stood across from him with his claymore resting against his shoulder, without saying a word. "You stand in the presence of greed without tribute. I do not care how you have made your way into my quarters, but you will go no further. Your soul will be mine." With a snap of greed's fingers, the piles of coins started dwindling down. Gold humanoid beings sluggishly pulled themselves from the bottom of the piles of coin. The holy man sprung into action, lowered his claymore, and broke into a sprint towards Greed. Greed smiled and tapped the armrest of his throne twice with his right middle finger as a void opened where his chest would be. The air pulsed, flaying the holy man's skin from his body and making it hang from the back of his mask like a cape. It was not enough to stop his inexorable drive. The gold monstrosities grabbed a hold of the skin, flailing behind him, and ripped it off. But he did not falter. Two more stood before him to block his path to Greed. The skinless holy man swung his claymore at the left minion at an upward angle and cut it clean from its waist to its shoulder, then back down, splitting the right one in half down the middle. "You're undeserving of such power," yelled Greed. His feet burrowed into the heap of artifacts below him, and two spikes burst from the floor behind the holy man. Both spikes impaled the holy man through the back of his shoulders and raised him in the air. Greed's eyes went black, and the stars rained down from the darkness above. They shot through the holy man like small balls of fire and left his body riddled with holes that were scorched around the edges. But the holy man would not die. Greed's golden minions climbed the spires, then liquefied themselves on the holy man and turned him into a gold statue. Greed brought the holy man closer by using the spires he made with his feet to impale him, and inquired about his new findings. The iron mask was ugly compared to his crown, so he had one of his minions break off the holy man's head and toss it to the side. The rosary is what caught his attention. This must be where his power lies, said Greed, as he had a minion break off the holy man's arm, wielding his claymore, then placed it on Greed's throne. Greed tapped his right index finger on his throne, making his minions and the gold covering the holy man melt away. He then retracted his feet and let what was left of the holy man's skinless body drop to the ground. I can never get that spell right. Always a piece still hanging on, said Greed, admiring the holy man's skinless arm that was still gripping his claymore. The holy man's limb levitated in front of Greed, but his face grew sour. He watched the rosary and claymore turn black and crumble before him. "What is this black magic?" cried Greed, before his head fell onto the seat of the throne where his lap would be. The holy man walked in front of Greed's throne and crouched down, making himself eye level. The holy man noticed a twitch of Greed's finger and immediately rose to his feet while swinging his claymore in an upward motion, bisecting Greed and his throne up the middle. The throne fell to both sides of the red crown that sat upon Greed's head, turned into blood and drizzled into the pile of artifacts below them. Shortly after, a red vine shot into the darkness above, where the stars were no more. The holy man placed his free hand on the massive red vine and watched the word Greed illuminate all over his arm, then disappeared, showing remnants of unscarred skin as a tear fell from under his mask. He looked down at his right hand, carrying the claymore, with thorned rosary binding them together, and let it drop next to him. The holy man began digging his fingers into the vine, making it bleed, and started climbing. His claymore dangled from the rosary, causing it to shred his forearm, while the claymore etched patterns in the back of his legs as it swayed back and forth. And that's it for this chapter, my little hellhounds. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notified when I upload part 3. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.